Hey ho, hi, hey ho. How we doing? This is a friendly reminder that a simple act of kindness can really change someone's day and potentially their entire life. So take some deep breaths. Just a couple deep breaths right here. Ready? Inhale and exhale. We'll do one more. Do an inhale. And we'll do an exhale. Feels nice. Feels good. Thanks for breathing with me. I'm your host, Steven, aka Mount Analogue. Welcome to Analogue Thoughts. If this is your first time, welcome. And then if this is your any other time, welcome back. Before I get these episodes rolling, I like to do a bit of brain puking. I like to do a bit of just talking about what's going on in my life. So as you all know, the horrors continue to unfold in the news as we watch our freedoms stripped away in these United States. I've seen some people in other countries making videos that are shaming the people in the United States for not burning things, which is really interesting to me because it's like, I could never imagine shaming the people of a country that are actively going through a hostile takeover by a dictator. But here we are. And I get it. Like, the rest of the world sees Americans as lazy or as like unwilling to stand up for themselves or uneducated in a way where they don't understand what's going on, so they just choose not to act. And that's really not the case. For anyone that's outside of the United States listening to this, there's a lot of people that want to start the fires, the literal revolution. They just don't know where the rubber hits the road. They don't know, because I mean, at the end of the day, people have families. People have to pay their rent. People can't just like go to the Capitol building in their hometown and catch it on fire and then just say, well, whatever happens to my family, I don't care. So that's something to consider. I know I'm just kind of off the rails right now, but I kind of got swept away in this thought process of these people. And this isn't to say that other countries don't have a compassionate outlook on what's going on here, because for every video I see of people shaming citizens of the United States for not acting, I also see, for every single one of those videos, I also see 100 videos that are from people outside the United States that are saying, we stand with you, we are sorry for you, we weep for you. And also, we are doing things. There are protests in every major city in the United States. I think right now where we're at in the country is we're frustrated, we're mad, we're upset, and we want something to happen. We want to do something, but a lot of people just don't know what that looks like. I watched a video, and you can probably find this video too, but I watched a video of this guy yesterday who I saved it on my phone because I was like, how is this not like huge news? But it might happen all the time. I don't know. This guy was climbing the fence at the White House. And literally before he went up, he just said, fuck it. And he started climbing the huge black gated fence at the White House. And of course, as soon as he got to the top, snipers appeared and people started running up to him, and there were dogs, and he was immediately arrested. But I think that person probably was at their breaking point, and they're like, this is where the rubber hits the road. I'm getting in there. I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I'm going. I'm doing it. And it was really kind of surreal just to see. I mean, I know we had the embarrassment of January 6th, which I just want to say, I'm not going to say his name, but he refers to them as the J6 hostages. It's so weird. He's so weird and such a, I don't want this to be a political podcast. That's not why we're here. But I can't not talk about it. I can't not talk about how every day I'm hoping there is relief for all the people being hunted down and literally deported to Guantanamo, to these concentration camps that we're creating. I don't know what to do. I'm personally frustrated and want to do something. And raising awareness is good. Going to protests is good. Being informed is good, and informing others is good. All this stuff is great. It's wonderful. But at the end of the day, some big moves need to happen. Something's going to have to happen where the people overthrow the government, because we're at that point. We've reached that point, and I don't know what that looks like, and I don't think it can be diplomatic at this point. I think it has to be something aggressive, not aggressive, but it has to be something physical. Literally, the people of the United States have to physically remove the powers that are in there at this point. I don't think we can do it with votes anymore. I think we're past that. And I hate to say it. I'm not in here. I don't want to be in here like instigating a war, but war is upon us and we have to do something about it. And I don't know what that looks like, because I have a family and I have obligations and I got to pay bills and keep the rent on. It's like, where do I go? What do I do? I think that's where a lot of the frustration we're feeling as a country is coming from, just as the citizens of this country. And that's when I see these videos from other countries of people shaming us, it's like they don't maybe understand the position that we're in. And they're mad at us too, because they're like, the majority of you guys voted for this administration. And that's just not true, because less than half of our population actually voted. Less than half. And of that less than half people, of those less than half people, only a little over half of those people voted for him and his administration. So we're talking about a fraction of our population actually voted for him. If you even believe in the sanctity of the vote, or in the legitimacy of the vote, which honestly at this point I do not. I voted, but I have as an adult not really believed in the election system, but I still vote. People say it's really important, and I do get why it's really important, because it's like, if we all just ignore it and be like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's all rigged, it's all crooked, then it just gets taken away, and it's just one more right that we don't have access to. It's one more thing it's one more way that we get oppressed by the government and the billionaires that run the government. Take note on what your skill sets are. Take note and figure out how you can apply them to your daily life to make a change and raise awareness. That's the constructive advice I can give at this time. Beyond that, there are a lot of other ways you can get involved, but I would say for now, if you haven't, figure out where you can plug into this revolution and take some notes about what you're good at and what that looks like. Let's move on. Let's get out of this world. Let's get out of this spiraling headspace of politics. And I know we're at like the 9-minute mark. I promise you, if this is your first time listening, this is not a political podcast. I do not normally do stuff like this. I don't normally ramble about politics for 9 minutes at the beginning. And I'm sure you are too, I'm just flabbergasted. And you're probably chafed. I'm chafed, mentally chafed about all of this. So that's not what you came here. Or maybe it is, I don't know. But it's not really what I do on this show. This isn't a political show like that, but it's impossible not to talk about. I'm going to do just a little bit more rambling before we get into today's episode, because I said I was going to do some life updates. I'm trying to do that at the beginning of these episodes, so I'm going to do it. Things with me are that it was my birthday. And it was my birthday last Thursday, and it was great. My partner took me out for dinner, and we got some cheesecake, and she actually bought me She bought me this thing where you get mailed a couple letters every month, and it's this story that unfolds like snail mail, like in the actual mail, and it comes with pictures and little hints and drawings and these letters that have this story unfold. And I got the first two. It's really interesting and weird, and I love it. So thank you for that, Mallory. I had a birthday show on Friday, and I did, if you don't know, if you've never been to one of my shows, I do a live looping experience where a lot of it is improvised. I've got like a drum machine, a keyboard, a 505 looper, and I was able to get the whole room screaming that Donald Trump is a literal fucking fascist. We screamed that over and over top of this beat that I made, and it felt really good. It felt really nice. I think everyone needed that therapy. That's one way I can plug in therapy through music. But at the show, I saw a lot of friends and some family, and it was amazing. And I hung up a bunch of art in their art gallery, and I got to look at a bunch of art. There were just great conversations. It was really nice to get out of my house and just connect with people. I also, at the beginning of the shows, like to do a little Felix update. Felix is my son. He is officially signed up for, or not, he is lined up to start his swimming lessons in March. He's thriving. Every day he gets smarter and smarter. His brain is expanding exponentially, and it's blowing my mind. He is thriving, and he is a sweet boy. We've had some spring-ish days here in Ohio, so that's been really nice to go outside and just go on walks, go to the park, he's got a balance bike, so we've been using his balance bike, and just being outside does so much for the morale and the cabin fever. So come on, Mother Nature, let's get there. Let's do this. Let's make it happen. One more thing, one last tiny little thing before we get into the actual meat of today's episode. Whatever platform you're listening on, there is a way to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, or leave a rating or review. The ratings, if you're on Spotify or Apple Music, the ratings really go a long way. So if you can do that, that would be greatly appreciated. All of those things go a really long way. If you're on YouTube, let's subscribe. However you can support in that respect is infinitely appreciated. I also have a Patreon. You get early access to podcasts, early access to art and music and everything like that. That link will be in the show's notes. Also, I am giving away 3 subscriptions for a year to my Patreon. And I'll have details on how you can get into that drawing very soon. I'm brainstorming exactly how I want to roll that out, but stay tuned. If you're not a patron, stay dialed into my socials, and I'll announce it here on the podcast too on how you can win a year subscription to the Patreon. So without further ado, let's get into today's topic. Today, we're diving into the world of real life, mad scientists. The brilliant, unhinged minds who pushed the boundaries of science so far that they sometimes lost their grip on reality. From electrified corpses to secret potions for eternal life. Imagine seeing a dead body suddenly sit up and twitch. Now imagine that happening in front of a crowd on purpose. That's exactly what happened in 1803 thanks to Giovanni Aldini. Aldini was an Italian scientist obsessed with galvanism. And galvanism is the study of electricity's effects on biological tissue. One of the main reasons he got so obsessed with this is that he was the nephew of Luigi Galvani, who was the pioneer of galvanism. Giovanni Aldini conducted public experiments where he zapped executed criminals with electricity, making their limbs jerk and making their eyes open. His most famous experiment was on this guy named George Foster in London. And George Foster was a convicted murderer who was executed by hanging. But they took his body, his corpse, and they electrified it. They used galvanism, and while they did this experiment, the corpse's face twisted into a grotesque grin. One eye opened, and the entire audience was freaked out. Many people believe that Aldini's experiments inspired Mary Shelley's Frankenstein for obvious reasons. And Mary Shelley was born She was born August 30th, 1797. So she would have only been 5 years old in 1803 when Aldini experimented on the corpse. But in her introduction to the story Frankenstein, although she doesn't mention Aldini, she mentions galvanism. And galvanism was also among the evening discussion topics before she experienced her waking dream that led to writing her story. If you're not familiar with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein story, I would highly suggest reading it because it's really interesting. It's not like the movies at all. I mean, it is kind of. There is a reanimated corpse that comes back to life, but in the books, Frankenstein is way more human. He's way more sentient and has way more capacity to think and understand reality. So highly recommend reading Frankenstein. At this point, it's almost it's a tradition to have a story having to do with using electricity to bring someone to life. If you're in the horror world in one way or another, or I guess not even necessarily electricity, but really just using technology to do it. Electricity, computers, some kind of serum. There's movies like Reanimator, RoboCop, Edward Scissorhands. And these are all, this premise is a wonderful trope that we all love. Doing something, or at least I love, doing the impossible, playing God, and creating something creating something that defies nature. And I think that Aldini was a big inspiration for a lot of these stories, and his experiment in 1803 was very responsible for inspiring all of, he probably, I mean, he did have obvious scientific, he created obvious scientific understandings, revelations, I guess, but I would say he almost had more of an impact on the sphere of arts and culture, more so than on the scientific community. And in the scientific world, it begs to question, could electricity really bring someone back to life? Or was Aldini just putting on a show? Even in his own experiment, it's like, was this a circus? Was this a circus trick, or did you really care about this? Did you genuinely think that electricity was going to bring this person back to life? Because obviously before he did this experiment in the streets, he had to have tried it out in a lab on something and had seen that it didn't work. He knew it didn't actually work, but he was like, I'm going to get a rise out of this crowd if I bring my corpse out and try this experiment in front of a bunch of people. He knew he was putting on a show. So that's our first mad scientist. Our second mad scientist is named Ilya Ivanov. And Ilya is a scientist who tried to make human-ape hybrids. So what happens when you give a Soviet scientist too much funding and a fascination with hybrid animals? What happens is you get an attempt to create a human-ape hybrid. Ilya Ivanov was a Russian biologist who specialized in artificial insemination and animal hybridization. His work with animals led him to attempt one of the most ethically dubious experiments in history. One of them. There's been a lot of ethically dubious experiments in history. I really like that word, dubious. In the 1920s, he received funding from the Soviet government, allegedly to prove evolution and also to create a super soldier. They were like, hey, let's make ape-human super soldiers that we can unleash upon the world. Although there is some speculation as to his actual reasoning for these experiments, and his motivations are unclear by historians. They're like, we think it was this, the government wanted that, there's paperwork that says this, but the totality of his motivations are somewhat unclear. As early as 1910, he had given a presentation to the World Congress of Zoologists in Austria, in which he described the possibility of obtaining such a hybrid through artificial insemination. He attempted to inseminate female chimpanzees with human sperm in Guinea, but the experiments obviously failed. And then this is the really gross part. Later, he planned to inseminate human women with ape sperm, but the project was shut down before it could proceed. Thank God. Ivanov's work obviously raises very big ethical questions about the boundaries of science and the treatment of both humans and animals. And think about it, like, if he was successful, if there was some way that there could be these human animal hybrids, what would that look like in society? What would their I mean, I'm sure at first we would treat them as a subhuman species that was just we would consider them an abomination as a whole on Earth. I wouldn't. I personally would think it was cool and would want to integrate them into society. Let's do it. There are hybrid animals today. Like when you think about mules are a combination of a donkey and a horse. And then we also have ligers, which are a combination of lions and tigers. These are real hybrids. They're not human animal hybrids, although humans are animals, but they're hybrids nonetheless. They're close enough genetically to create something new. So I get it. I get why Ivanov was thinking that humans might be able to. I'm not a scientist. This is all coming from a very non-science person. But I do get why he was trying to, or thought this would work. Because obviously, if we've learned anything from evolution, humans are very related to apes and chimpanzees. So why he was like, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And it didn't work. And it makes you wonder, how far should science go in exploring the boundaries of life? We're already doing countless experiments on animals all the time for products, like product experiments. What if we put this makeup on this chimp? What's it going to do? Is it going to burn its skin? Like, that stuff is happening all the time. We live in a society where it's for a lot of people it's not acceptable, but for a lot of people they just don't care. But when we swing that to the human side of things, we're like, well, let's do human clinical trials. There's way more lines. We put a lot more value on a human life than the life of a chimp. And so it also, once again, it just makes you wonder what a human ape hybrid, what their rights and where their lines would be. And it's an interesting thought experiment. Where are your lines? What do you think is the ethical line that shouldn't be crossed? Are you humans? Is humans your line? Like, we shouldn't experiment like this on humans? Are animals your line? And if animals are your line, like, what is your line with animals? Like, is it that rats are okay? We can do it on rats, but don't do it on a cute little bunny? Or what about dolphins? Dolphins are super intelligent, super smart. They show empathy. They have a social structure. They have their own language. Is it okay to experiment on dolphins? Like, what is the line? And I feel like for a lot of people, that line is intelligence. And I wonder why that is. It's like the more we think, and I would say we as the collective human consciousness, but we think that the smarter you are, the more you're able to understand your reality and interact with your reality, the less you should be experimented upon, the more rights you should have. And honestly, this is not to get deep down this rabbit hole. This is the root of racism. This is how the West and the East. This is how the world used to view Black people or indigenous Americans, just indigenous people or people that weren't white. The white people of the world would look upon other races as not as intelligent, and they would say it's okay to do X, Y, or Z to them because they don't matter as much. That was their perspective, literally. And that was the perspective in World War II when they were experimenting on the Jews because they considered them not as intelligent or not subhuman species. It's really gross and really weird, and we draw a lot of lines as humans, and then we redraw the lines, and then we're still drawing the lines. The lines are still just they're not even lines, they're just wiggly things. Anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole. Let's get into our third mad scientist, Robert Cornish. And Robert Cornish is the man who tried to resurrect the dead with a seesaw. If shocking corpses wasn't enough for you, let's talk about the guy who thought you could bring people back to life with a homemade seesaw and some adrenaline. Robert Cornish was an American scientist in the 1930s who believed he could resurrect a dead body by shaking it violently. His method was to take a corpse, strap it to a teeter-totter, and then rapidly move the body up and down to force blood circulation. And then he would inject the body with a cocktail of epinephrine and anticoagulants. And his experiments were actually successful on his dogs. Cornish wished to expand his clinical trials to include human testing. And I don't want to say, when you look this up, it says he was successful on his dogs, but then when you dig a little deeper, his dogs didn't come back right. They didn't come back. Sometimes dead is better. Sometimes you got to leave them dead. And he didn't leave them dead. He didn't leave them dead. They came back as they were messed up. They kind of came back to life, but it wasn't right. Something was off. Something was wrong. But they did come back, allegedly. So after he does his dogs, he wants to do humans. He's like, I got my dogs back to life. Let's see what this looks like on people. San Quentin death row inmate Thomas McMonagle contacted Cornish, offering his body for possible reanimation following his execution. But the California law enforcement refused Cornish and McMonagle's petition to be involved in the experiment due to concerns that this is funny. The prison denied the experiment because due to concerns that a reanimated murderer would have to be freed upon the double jeopardy clause. So basically, they were like, you're not allowed to be reanimated because if you get reanimated and you're free, then if you get reanimated, we would have to free you because we can't charge you again. We already charged you and then you already died and now you're coming back and this would be double jeopardy. Which, if you think about it, is kind of true. If you came back if you served your time, you did the death sentence, and then you come back, it's like, what? I already died. You already killed me. That's what I was already in here for. You got to let me go. So McMonagle was trying to find a loophole. He was like, if I can cheat death, I'll get out. But the San Quentin prison killed him in the gas chamber in February 1948, and the experiment did not go through. He did not get his wishes. Later on, in 1935, McCornish actually played himself in a movie called Life Returns, which is based on the story of his experiments, which I really want to watch this movie now. I've put it on my list. So how are we looking at death as a society? How do our views of life and death influence scientific experimentation? Should we pursue resurrection technologies, or in doing that does that kind of like devalue the natural process of death and devalue what nature intended to happen? Are we pushing the envelope too much with playing God if we start uploading our consciousness to microchips or figuring out ways to turn our bodies into cyborgs and reach potential immortality? That's something I feel like we're genuinely going to be experiencing in the next couple centuries is download, basically, essentially, for lack of a better term, downloading our brains onto computers or enhancing ourselves physically to a point where we are indestructible or undiable, unkillable, undeathable. I think eventually on a long enough timeline, it's just going to be normal. People will have the option. They'll be like, do you want to die? Do you want to die now? Or do you want to inhabit a robot? I actually read a really good book called Womb City last year. I think I talked about it on the podcast before. But essentially, the premise is when you die, your consciousness can get uploaded to another body. The bodies are kind of, for lack of a better word, they're not farmed by the government, but the whole operation is orchestrated by the government. And the book touches on caste systems and equality and the wealth divide we have in the world, where essentially, if you're not from a to-do family or wealthy family, you're going to get kind of a crappy body or a body that is lower on the list of wanting to be had. And you could live like, it was something like 7 life cycles before you had to actually die. Before they were like, okay, you've you've lived 7 lifetimes. You have to just die now. But there were people who were super rich that could bypass that law, and they would be however many lifetimes old. They would be on their 20th life cycle or whatever. This is a really good book. It's called Womb City, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for a good read. The ending, I'm obviously not gonna spoil the ending, but the ending gets really intense and it takes a turn. The whole book is kind of sci-fi, and it's like sci-fi meets paranormal, I guess I'll just say without ruining anything. But the ending gets very surreal. Check it out. Our 4th mad scientist is someone named Stubbins Firth. And if you have a weak stomach, if you don't like hearing about gross stuff, just go ahead and skip forward a little bit. If you don't want to hear about some gross, disgusting things, because this is definitely our most disgusting, other than maybe the artificial insemination thing. This is pretty gross. This is bad. But Stubbins Firth was the doctor who drank vomit to study yellow fever. Have you ever been so dedicated to science that you'd drink infected vomit? Not you personally, but like, has anyone else? Has anyone else done this? I couldn't find anyone else who was this, I'll just say, dedicated, I guess. I'm so dedicated to science that I will drink your puke to prove a point. Stubbins Firth was born 1784, died 1820. He was an American trainee doctor, notable for his unusual investigations into the cause of yellow fever. His theory was that the disease was not contagious, and that the drop in cases during the winter of his experiments showed that it was more likely a result of the heat and stresses of the summer months. So while he was correct in the fact that yellow fever was significantly more prevalent in the summer, Firth's explanation proved to be incorrect. And it was a full 6 decades after his death that a breakthrough was made about how contagious and the reasons that yellow fever was contagious. Firth chose to bring himself into direct contact with bodily fluids from people that had been infected with yellow fever. He started by making incisions on his arms and smearing infected vomit into the cuts. Then he proceeded to pour it onto his eyeballs. He continued in his attempts to infect himself by frying the vomit and inhaling the fumes. He was freebasing the puke of people infected with yellow fever. Then, finally, when he did not become ill, he resorted to drinking the vomit, undiluted, just straight to the dome, slurping back that sweet yellow fever vomit. He also smeared his body with blood, saliva, and urine. And he still failed to contract the disease and saw this as proof of his hypothesis that yellow fever was not contagious. So gross. Firth is so disgusting. That's so gnarly. I feel like, sure, he's dedicated. That is another level of dedication. But at what point are you shunned by your peers for being an absolute lunatic? Because that's just the highest level of unhinged. I can't imagine his science cohorts were like, yeah, dude, drink the, or maybe they were egging him on. They were like, let's see how far this guy will go. He smeared the vomit on his wounds, but they were like, yeah, but you didn't put it in your eyeballs. And he was like, oh, okay, I'll put it in my eyeballs. And they were like, yeah, but you didn't freebase it. And he's like, I guess I'll freebase it. And they're like, how far will this guy go? They're like, you didn't drink it, though. You didn't drink it. He's like, I guess I'll drink it. It's like a game of chicken where his science friends just pushing him, seeing how far he would go. Turns out he would go all the way. It later emerged that the samples used by Firth for his experiments had come from late-stage patients who were no longer contaminated with the virus. Yellow fever is contagious, just not in late-stage patients, which is what he tested. So all of his samples were not from people who were freshly infected, and this was his downfall. He did all of these experiments were for naught, because turns out his findings weren't even true. Yellow fever was absolutely contagious. He just was testing the wrong type of samples. I don't know if any scientist today would go to these lengths, these extreme lengths for science. Or maybe they would. I don't know. It's gross. It's disgusting. There's got to be a balance of your own personal health and your pursuit of knowledge. Because what was he really trying to do here? I mean, obviously he was trying to see if yellow fever was contagious. But also, had he contracted yellow fever, what would that do? Realistically. Legitimately. Why was he so hell-bent on proving that it wasn't contagious and going to these lengths? It's weird. I feel like there were other ways he could have figured this out. Our next mad scientist, and I'm going to butcher his name, so for the rest of this segment on the scientist, I'm just going to refer to him as Sergei. His name is Sergei Burkhonenko, and I probably mangled that, but it's the best I could do. Sergei Burkhonenko. But Sergei is the mad scientist that kept a dog's head alive. He was born 1890, died 1960. And he was a Soviet scientist who developed an early lung machine which he used to keep severed dog heads alive. He was a physician, he was a biomedical scientist, and technologist during the Stalinist era. And his research was actually vital to development of open heart procedures in Russia. He made this machine called the auto-injector. And the auto-injector circulated oxygen. It circulated oxygenated blood through the severed heads, allowing them to remain, quote, alive for hours. And the heads responded to stimuli, they blinked, and they even licked their noses. And you can see these experiments. They were showcased in a 1940 Soviet propaganda film called Experiments in the Revival of Organisms. So all this got caught on film. You can check it out. Through 1951 to 1958, Sergei led the Institute of Experimental Surgical Devices and Instruments. Following his experiments with canines, he was granted permission to continue his auto-injector experiments with human cadavers. However, those experiments failed to produce encouraging results, resulting in Sergei losing favor with Soviet leadership. So they gave him the green light to go ahead and do human cadaver experiments. He didn't get the same results on the humans, and he was starting to lose some of his funding, and some of his praise from Soviet leadership. He was drafted to serve in World War I in 1914, and he witnessed numerous combat injuries while assigned to the active army as a junior physician. He returned to work in 1917 in Moscow. And I'm thinking, my thought here is perhaps when he was in World War I, he saw horrors. He saw unspeakable horrors that drove him to do the experiments that he did. Because war changes people. And maybe it changed him in a way where he was starting to think, he saw people die. He saw travesty, and he was thinking, maybe we can bring them back. Maybe they don't have to die. This is another scientist that was looking to play God, or that was looking to change the natural order of things, change the natural process of things. In 1965, 5 years after his death, Sergei was awarded the Lenin Prize for advancing knowledge of artificial blood circulation and laying the ground for future advancements. And his experiments laid the groundwork for advancements in cardiac surgery today. When people are doing cardiac surgeries today, they're using technologies that were developed by him. So although his experiments were not necessarily meant for these purposes, his auto-injector and his processes did become a big part of cardiac surgery and saving people's lives in the future. So some good actually came from this, and his crazy doghead experiments in the future would go on to save people's lives. And once again, this goes back to the question of, should scientific progress justify animal experimentation and extreme animal experimentations? How do we balance the potential benefits of such research with the moral cost? What lines are we drawing? If we can experiment on chimpanzees for a year and figure out a way to solve cancer, we're okay. So here's a thought experiment. We're going to cure cancer. We know it's going to happen. We just have to do 600,000 experiments on apes to really get our formula right. And it's going to torture them. It's going to hurt them a lot. They're going to not be having a good time. But after we do our experiments on the 600,000 apes, we will eradicate cancer forever. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Some people would say, no, it's not. Some people would say, yes, it is. And these are kind of these are the things we have to think about with science and experimentation and medicine and technology and advancements. Because unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, we can figure out a lot with animal experimentation. But where do we draw these lines? Where are we drawing these lines? Because it can get real weird, real fast, and real unethical, and real, yeah. There's a spectrum of tolerance when it comes to this topic. There's some people that say no animal experimentation, and there are some people that say, I don't care, they're animals, experiment on them as much as you want. Where do you sit? Where are you at with it? So that wraps up our final mad scientist of the day. And we're coming to an end of the podcast. I just have a couple more segments that I like to do. Our next segment is something that I do called Let's Ask AI. Let's Ask AI. And today I asked AI, what wild, mad scientist type experiments could you see happening in the future? And AI gave me an enormous list of things for this one. I'm not going to read them all. I'm going to skim through them and I'm going to talk about my favorites. I'm going to mention them all, but I'm not going to read all of the bullet points that AI gave me for this, because some of them I feel like are they kind of go without explaining. The first one is human AI brain hybrids, which I feel like this one goes it goes without explanation, or doesn't need an explanation, but basically scientists could attempt to merge human brains with artificial intelligence, creating a hybrid consciousness capable of superhuman computation and memory. A lot of ethical questions here. A lot of cool things that could happen, but also a lot of ethical questions. Our second mad scientist type experiment that could happen is genetic engineering of designer humans. Our third one is resurrection of extinct species. Scientists could attempt to bring back extinct species such as the woolly mammoth or the dodo using DNA from preserved specimens. I'm thinking Jurassic Park. I'm thinking Dinosaur Island. Our fourth thing is immortality through mind uploading. We kind of already touched on that in this episode. AI's fifth thing is the creation of synthetic life forms. And this one's interesting. Scientists could design and create entirely new life forms from scratch using synthetic biology and artificial DNA. That is a wild thought because we are already growing meat in labs. We're already growing tissue. We can pretty much grow anything we want with stem cells. So I'm sure behind closed doors, we've already created a completely synthetic life form. The public just doesn't know about it. I think that one is already happening, is happening as we speak. Number 6 is a really interesting one, and I really like this one. It's time dilation experiments. Scientists could attempt to manipulate time either by slowing it down or speeding it up using advanced physics and technology. And it goes on to say how this might work. Experiments with extreme gravitational fields, like those near black holes, or high-speed travel could theoretically alter the flow of time for specific objects or individuals. And we all know what happens when you tamper with time. We've all seen enough movies or read enough books. You start getting into these consequences, these unintended consequences, these temporal paradoxes, these things that shouldn't have happened. You go back to look at the Great Pyramids and you step on a plant, and that plant was going to feed an animal that was going to be on the chariot. That plant fed a horse that was going to power the chariot of an emperor, and that emperor was going to charge into this way. It's this domino effect. If you start going back in time, start altering time, you start creating all these tangent timelines. But I feel like there's already an infinite amount of tangent timelines. Speaking of tangents, I'm getting way off on one. Our next experiment that AI suggested was human cloning for organ harvesting. Could already be going on behind the scenes. Weather control and geoengineering, absolutely already going on. Brain-to-brain communication networks. So what is this? It is scientists could develop technology that allows brain-to-brain communication, creating a hive mind or collective consciousness. Neural implants or wearable devices could enable people to share thoughts, emotions, and memories directly with others. I feel like there was an episode of Black Mirror like this. I'm pretty sure there is. But it goes on to say there's ethical questions. Would this erode individual privacy and autonomy? Could this technology be weaponized or used for mind control? Absolutely. And I think that was the premise. I need to check out all the Black Mirror episodes. I've only seen the first 2 seasons, but there's more that I want to dive into the rest. I got just a couple more of these, and I'm just gonna blast through them because I think AI gave me like 15, and I'm not gonna sit and explain all of them. But number 10 is space colonization with genetically modified humans. 19 is artificial wombs and gestation outside the body. Are we not already doing this? Aren't there people being grown in tubes? Isn't that a thing? Or am I just thinking that's a thing? Number 12 is memory editing and manipulation. 13 is fusions of humans and machines, cyborgs, RoboCop. Let's go. Not RoboCop. We don't need RoboCop. We don't need a cop human cyborg. But we do need human cyborgs. I think that'd be tight. I want robot legs. And I want to have a jetpack. So let's make that happen sooner than later. Number 14 is the creation of a parallel universe. Number 15 is emotional and personality engineering. Thanks, AI. That was an immense, in-depth response. I appreciate the depth of that response. Let's move on to the last segment of the show. At the end of each episode, I like to just give a list of fun facts. It's just something I like to do. It's just fun. It's just for fun. We're gonna have some fun facts in the mix. Today, I wanted to do a list of fun facts all about human biology, because I feel like it kind of ties into the subject matter of today, kind of keeps things in the same lane. Our first fun fact is that the human brain generates enough electricity to power a small LED light, producing roughly 12 to 25 watts of power when awake, which is sufficient to power a low wattage bulb. Our next fun fact is that a baby is born with around 300 bones, but as they grow, many of these bones fuse together, resulting in adults having only 206 bones in their entire body. These babies are born with jelly bones, and then their jelly bones all fuse into bigger bones, and then, yeah. I remember when Felix was born, he had, you can see it in most babies, but they have these plates in their skull that aren't solid. They are still fusing together, and you can watch a newborn's head, not like in real time. You can't like sit and stare at it and watch it, but over a pretty short period of time, some weeks, you can actually see the plates in their heads start to come together and their heads smooth out. It's really surreal. Our next fun fact is that the masseter muscle in your jaw is considered the strongest muscle by weight in the human body and can exert a force of up to 200 pounds when biting down on molars. Our next fun fact is that your bones constantly rebuild themselves through a process called remodeling, meaning you essentially get a whole new skeleton about every 10 years. That is wild. Our next fun fact is that the human body shrinks throughout the day due to gravity compressing your spine. You are actually taller in the morning. So if you're going to get your height, if you're going to the BMV, to the DMV, to the auto place where you got to get your license, go in the morning so that you're a little bit taller. And our next and final fun fact is that your liver can regenerate completely, even if 75% of it is removed. And I actually saw some sources that said even if 90% of your liver is removed, it can still regenerate. It's like a starfish. Oh, and so I lied. This next fun fact is actually our last fact. The gut is often called the second brain because it contains a network of over 100 million neurons, known as the enteric nervous system, which allows it to control digestion largely independently from the central nervous system, influencing things like appetite and even impacting mood and emotions through its connection to the brain via the vagus nerve. So your gut is thinking, your gut has neurons. Always trust your gut. That's why we get these gut feelings. Our stomach's telling us something, and we need to listen. These stories today about these mad scientists, some of them are very gross. Some of them are weird and just why. But they also highlight humanity's relentless pursuit of knowledge. And that relentless pursuit is often at the expense of ethical boundaries. These stories also raise important questions about the role of science in society. How do we define the limits of ethical experimentation in terms of science, medicine, technology? Like, where are the lines? Where are the limits? What lengths shouldn't we go to progress our species. And what really drives humans to explore the boundaries of life, death, and existence? Do we want to see what's in the great beyond and come back from it? Are we interested in living forever? It's a soup. There is a soup of intentions behind all of this. These experiments remind us that science is not just about discovery. It's also about responsibility. And as we continue to push these boundaries of what's possible, we also must consider the moral and ethical implications of our actions. We're going great places, but we got to be careful and we got to be mindful of what kind of impact we're having. Don't forget to leave that like, comment, review, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Like I said at the top of the show, I also have a Patreon you can join. That link is in the show's notes. Have a great week and weekend. I'll see you all next week. And until then, don't forget to check on your mental health and don't forget to check on the mental health of your loved ones. Bye.
Thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.